Being a hunter is not always looking for animals. Sometimes a hunter is needed to find a different type of creature. Some of these creatures lurk in the darkness of our minds. The creature I normally hunt myself are casually known as urban legends or cryptids. My first encounter with one of these creatures was when I was only 13 years old and I was hunting with my father in the local forest. I am not disclosing the area for certain reasons. We were both walking down the path carrying our rifles like normal, and I was under the impression we were hunting game like deer or maybe an elk. After a long walk, we came across a carcass of what I guessed was a deer that had been unfortunate enough to cross the paths with quite a large predator, and that left it completely eviscerated. I felt a lump form in my throat and a tear fall down my cheek at the sight of this poor animal. My father just looked at me and gave me a look of disdain and disappointment as he reminded me that this is to be expected in the wild. I smiled and nodded as I wiped away the tear as my father nodded and cocked his rifle. We pushed forward as I began to wonder what could have slaughtered the deer in such a way, leaving it completely obliterated. Following the unused trails deeper into the forest, my heart began to beat faster. My father, on the other hand, was as cool as could be. He just kept his eyes peeled intently for any sign of movement in the area. My hands, though, couldn't stop shaking. We made our way deeper into the foreboding wilderness. After a short while, my father raised his hand up and caused me to come to a sudden stop. This nearly made my heart skip a beat. He knelt down and placed his hand on the ground, shifting a large pile of leaves to uncover a massive footprint that I estimated to be in the diameters of at least 28 inches long and 8 inches wide. My father grunted in annoyance as the smell of rot and decay flowed across the wind. The smell nearly made me gag. The feeling of retching came to mind, and all my stomach seemed to turn itself inside out as my father approached my side and pointed to a small opening up in the cliff face. Approaching the opening, my father grabbed me and shook his head and whispered for me to stay outside and keep watch. All I could do was watch my father descend into the darkness of the opening alone. I just stood there with my back to the gaping maw, wishing I could be back home with my friends and not stuck in the middle of a damned forest chasing shadows. My father had only been gone a matter of minutes as I watched as the sun began to dip down on the horizon. My mind slowly drifted off in all directions. My eyes began to droop as the fatigue of walking all day began to take effect. I was just about to cave to the sweet temptation of sleep when suddenly I was jolted back to an alert state as a blood-curdling scream ripped through the air. The scream didn't come from the forest, it came from the depths of the moor, and all I could do was stand there, shaking in terror. As my fear subsided and I was able to move, I called out my father's name and listened for a response, but none came. After a short while, I pulled up the courage and entered the darkness of the cavern, and I was immediately hit by a putrid metallic stench that burned at my nostrils. Standing on the cavern floor, I couldn't see much, not even my hand in front of my face, so I decided to pull out one of my many flares which my father had always insisted me to carry in these situations. My father was more of a teacher than he was a father. He was always strict, and every order had to be hit perfectly. Sparking the flare, it exploded into light, slowly illuminating the cavern floor. However, the sight that I was met with will be burned into my soul until the end of my days. All I could see was blood. Blood covering the walls, the floor, and many different limbs scattered across the cavern floor. Within moments of my eyes locking onto this hellish sight in front of me, my stomach began to purge itself of my lunch. After vomiting on the floor, I looked around for my father and could only find the remains of human beings and animals that had been gnawed on by large canine-style teeth. Looking around and slowly moving the mass of flesh until I found my father's backpack and saw it had been torn apart and emptied violently of its contents. Dread filled my heart as I reluctantly continued my search, but as I came to the end of the cavern, my worst fears came to fruition, as I found my father laying in a puddle of his own blood, gasping for air as his chest has been torn out. Razor-sharp claws. I began to cry as I was hit by the sudden realization of what I must do. A single click and a bang, and it was all over. My first kill as a hunter should be something glorious, something you should be able to celebrate with your family and friends, something you talk about happily and with pride. But my first kill was my father. There was no possibility he would have survived much longer anyway, as I just had to stop his suffering. It took a while after that for me to recover, and when my grandfather took me in, I explained everything that happened that day, right down to the oversized footprints. My grandfather confirmed what creature was and told me to never talk about it to anyone outside of our profession, and we had to keep it secret, even from close friends. Telling the police it was a bear attack was the hardest part, as I knew that no bear could do such damage to a human being. But my father, in fact, was killed by a Gigantopithecus, or in layman's terms, a Bigfoot. It has been 10 years since my father's death, and I have been under the guidance and the tuition of my grandfather, a veteran hunter and a legend in his own rights and in the rights of our profession. He taught me the skills I needed to survive the world of man and beast. Unfortunately, my grandfather passed away peacefully in his sleep a few days ago. A rare thing for our hunters. Our culture is hidden from normal people, but of course they tell campfire stories of these creatures and call them urban legends and fake stories. But if they were ever to find out the truth, the consequences would be brutal and severe. So, we keep the secrets to those who are initiated into our order through grueling tasks and training. Hunters rarely work together due to us preferring to keep our numbers small so we can help with detection. Once we come of age, we are told to carry a simple device for communication purposes, and that device is an electronic pager. The electronic pager is connected to a network that certain branches of the government, usually one of our kind in our order, works with that branch and therefore gains access to information on these cases easily. That person then would contact one of our handlers, and then they would contact us with only coordinates. Once we receive these coordinates, we are to head out on our earliest convenience. Each page we receive is either a life that has been taken or is a missing person with suspicious events taking place. Pages are only used in an emergency, however. For normal jobs, we used to use a local posting board in our division post in the past. However, as times change, we had to update our ways also, and now use a website and a private server accessed with a diode that always harangues around our necks on a chain, and that connects us to a private satellite for job postings. It's like the dark web, but only deeper. The last page I received was in the middle of the night of a cold winter's evening, and the coordinates I received placed myself in the northern region of Nova Scotia. I began travelling at first light and caught the first flight to the region, but during my flight I looked at my dossier I was provided with and noticed that there has been reports of missing hikers and bodies found with human-style teeth marks lining the parts that were found. However, that was the earlier stages of the investigation, but now the remains that are being discovered are lined with more animalistic-style wounds. Once arrived on location, I met with my local contact. Once first contact is made though, I have to begin my investigation and find out that the local police have been finding body parts laid across the high trails, and some of the parts have even been bitten into. The local police of the area cannot know what I am, so I have to use a different persona each time, and once that persona has been used, I must discard it and destroy it, as I cannot be identified to any of these cases. In this situation, I used the persona of an animal bite specialist so I can get to the scene and check it out without much suspicion from the local police. With great disdain though, the police forced upon me an officer, so I was forced to bring him along, as they didn't want any evidence being damaged or tampered with. During my field work is already difficult even alone, but with the unexpected baggage it becomes more dangerous and difficult as I cannot act normally. Walking along the trails, I began to notice an unnatural pattern in the brush, and I also noticed that the wildlife in the area was quiet. Asking the officer the questions that were on my mind about the area, and all I got was quick and sharp answers, as the police do not trust outsiders who come into their investigations. After a while of walking the trail, the smell of rotting meat began to circulate the area as the police officer began to gag and retch. Looking around, I noticed a bloody mass at the base of a wall. The police officer instantly pulled his weapon from his holster and attempted to radio into control. However, when the officer attempted to call in, there was nothing but static. The police officer grunted in annoyance, and I looked around for more evidence of a cryptid, as the teeth marks in the carcass are not from normal creature activity. Watching the officer becoming more and more distressed at the situation, I begin to push along the trail, with the officer closely following behind, trying to get me to turn around and go back to the station, as it is not safe on the trails near nightfall, as in the high trails it becomes dark quickly and suddenly. Within moments of the police officer finished speaking, we hear a blood-curdling howl that resonates around the local area. I quickly look around and notice that the police officer is shaking, and before I could speak, the police officer has bolted down the path, completely terrified. To be honest, I was more annoyed at the cowardice of the officer, but I thought it was better that they went back and allowed me to get on with my job. Once the officer was out of sight, I opened my bag and pulled out a single 9mm handgun and a shotgun for taking down large targets. Once my main weapons were attached to my body, I pulled out my grandfather's trusty combat knife for a last resort option. I go back to the meat mound and check for any evidence I couldn't find with the officer around. I picked up a severed arm and checked it over, and a strong pungent smell of rot and decay emanated. However, the teeth marks in it were still fresh, and that narrowed down the creature that may have snacked upon this person. After placing the arm on the ground, I heard another blood-curdling scream, but this time it was closer and more frantic. I pulled my shotgun from my back and began to move closer in the direction of the howl, and the smell that permeates the air becomes stronger and more gut-wrenching. After a short while of tracking the scent, I came to a small cave in a large hidden grove that was surrounded to the north by large rock faces. Slowly entering the cave and heading down the main chamber, the cavern floor that was laid out in front of me was splattered in blood and sinew. Moving closer to the western chamber entrance, the smell became extremely strong, and at that point I knew what I was looking for was lurking below in the abyss of that chamber. I checked my weapons to make sure they were ready and began my descent into the chamber. Looking around carefully, I noticed bodies laying around each crevice. As I switch my light on, I come face to face with the body of a fresh kill, and to my discomfort and displeasure, I find out that the body is of the officer who ran off, and he didn't get far though, as the creature who was tracking us must have jumped the officer and slaughtered him without a sound escaping the officer's mouth. After a short investigation of the wounds, I noticed deep lacerations running across the body and a single bite mark that silenced the officer as it effortlessly tore out the officer's vocal cords. I finally knew what I was up against, and with that realization a shiver ran through my body. I cut down the body from the ceiling. My eyes, though, caught onto movement that scurried around at the end of the cavern. I raised my shotgun up and tracked it across the chamber and fired a shell into the creature, but with that speed it has, it easily dodged the buckshot and howled with a hungry snarl and dived towards me. Once hit, I fell to the ground, and with the impact, the wind was knocked out of me, and that caused me to wince in pain as the weight of the creature was nearly crushing my chest. Even with that pressure, I was able to push it off and roll away. As I rolled away though, I felt a searing pain to my hip as a claw easily sliced through the soft part of my armour. However, even with the searing pain, I scurried back to my feet, holding my wound to stem the small amount of blood, and lifted my shotgun once more. I slowly looked around the cavern for movement or even a sound, scanning the room slowly from left to right, making sure not to miss a single crevice. Within a second I feel a drip on my cheek as I slowly raise my eyes in fear to the ceiling and notice the creature hanging from a crevice, snarling down at me as its elongated arms were smeared in my own blood and its legs and emaciated bodies cling to the rock face above. I quickly move out of its way as it landed on the ground as my light illuminated the cryptid known as a dreaded Wendigo. The Wendigo began to snarl loudly as it slowly began to circle me, watching my each and every movement, with an animalistic intent, looking for any weakness it could exploit. However, when I looked into its starved eyes, all I could see was a hunger that I could never comprehend. The Wendigo stopped moving and narrowed its brow as drool leaked from its mouth. Our eyes locked, and I took that opportunity to fire 2 shots into the Wendigo, and all it seemed to do was anger it even more. The buckshot hit its flesh, and the Wendigo dived towards me, grabbing my body in a tackling form and slamming me into the wall. The creature's breath smelt like a rotting carcass that has been left out in the sun for a month. Each second the creature held me, it attempted to claw into my torso, but my body armour I was wearing protected me, causing its razor-sharp claws to slide off and causing part of its claws to snap against the hardened rock face. Struggling with the Wendigo's strength, I realised that my shotgun was out of reach, so I pulled out my handgun and rammed the barrel into its emaciated stomach and fired a full mag of hollow point rounds into its guts. The Wendigo howled in agony and stumbled back, and with a roar of unceasing anger, the Wendigo stood there, wiping the blood from its mouth, seeming near impossible to stop in its mission to devour me. The Wendigo narrowed its eyes once more and charged towards me at full speed. Watching the Wendigo, I made a quick decision and dodged the creature with seconds to spare. but as I did, I lost my handgun to a protruding rock face and fell to the ground. Stumbling to my feet, I look around and notice the Wendigo was standing in front of me, snarling as drool dripped from its maw. It reaches down, gripping me by the throat and lifting me from the ground effortlessly as it stares at its prey triumphantly. Once I was in the air, it began to tear at my flesh, trying to expose my organs for it to devour upon. Each strike was completely agonizing, but with a desperate final burst of strength, I reached down and tore my knife from its holster and drove the blade into the neck of the Wendigo, slowly beginning to twist it, making sure I severed the jugular vein, causing the Wendigo to drop me and grip its neck, screaming in fury and agony. Collapsing on the ground, holding my wounds as I cry out in pain as each and every nerve feel like it's on fire. Using the wall to climb to my feet, I began to move slowly while holding onto my stomach towards the creature. The dying Wendigo and I just stare into each other's eyes, as in my mind I knew this monstrous creature laying in front of me was once human. Slowly moving back to the entrance of the chamber, I retrieve my bag and prepare an explosive device. Struggling to walk, I place multiple explosives on supporting areas of the cavern and then head back to the entrance with the final explosive in hand. Reaching the exit, I attach it to the opening of the lair and take one look back at the creature struggling for life. Looking down at my weapon in hand, I aim at it and whisper a silent prayer before unloading a barrage of rounds to its head, trying to put out the Wendigo out of its misery. Once the shots rang out, I turned my back and walked from the lair. Once I was a safe distance in the grove, I turned my back and activated the device and watched the area explode, causing the whole cavern to collapse, sealing the creature and its dark deeds away forever. This is only one of many jobs us hunters take on. For now, I will blend back into normality when the time comes for me to take the call once more. Hi guys, this is Kindarous, and all I want to say is thank you for watching. Please subscribe because I want you to be notified for when my videos come out. I'd like you to drop a like and a comment on your favourite cryptid. For me, my favourite cryptid, I must admit, is the werewolf, because lycanthropy is badass. Also, I want to drop a special thank you to my fiance for editing the story. I do ramble and my grammar does kinda die off, so thank you honey, thank you again. Thanks guys for watching. This is Kindarous signing off.